Now, the search continues for the remains of several unidentified objects shot out of the sky over Canada and the U.S., but there's still very little details about what those objects were and where they may have originated. Joining us now live to discuss this is retired Major General and former NORAD Director of Communications, Scott Clancy. Scott, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, and happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you to you, too. And we'll start off. We know that these last three objects that were shot out of the sky, it comes very shortly after an alleged Chinese spy balloon was shot out of the sky over the Carolinas. Do you think that there is a connection between these latest three objects and that balloon?
I believe that there's a connection, but I don't necessarily think that connection has to be country of origin. I think that's prudent for NORAD, for the governments of Canada and the United States to wait until they can determine, after they have a chance to study the remains, and they're going to have to recover those first, before they determine country of origin. What I think the connection is that this seems to me, on the balance of probabilities, to be a concerted intelligence collection activity by one or more of our adversaries.
So should we be worried then? Is this something, again, it looks like this effort has really picked up over the last week at least. Is it picked up, or is it that we're now looking for these objects more after that balloon was spotted?
I think it's both. And I think that the idea that there are more has to do a little bit with the fact that a little bit of the adjustment on the sensors that NORAD has been using, as well as, more of a concerted effort to make sure that they're looking in lower airspeeds, higher altitudes at these slow-moving devices. But I don't think that's it in and of itself. I also think that this is a concerted effort by our adversaries in this moment. Or why this time frame? I think that's an interesting question. But to get to the root of your question, should Canadians be concerned? This is just an indication of activity that, for the time that I was in Alaska as the deputy commander up there and directing operations for all NORAD, is indicative of what our adversaries are coming against us all the time. The Russians fly into our airspace and identification zone routinely, and they're not there to look at the whales.
Right, right. And so this is something that I think for most of the public is kept under wraps. We're not aware of this, but you're saying it's not anything new to have these objects overhead, and this, if it's an espionage mission, then to take a look at what we're doing over here in North America, this is not new.
Well, I think what's new is having this many objects of this kind of fidelity through the airspace. I think that, based upon General Van Erck, my former commander's comments at his Pentagon briefings, we've had balloons come over top in the past. So some of this has happened in the past, but I think there's an uptick here. What I'm saying is it's indicative of the kind of complex intelligence gathering operations, whether it's cyber activity inside of our networks or espionage or influence operations that the governments of our adversaries are willing to conduct.
Now, as the former director of operations for all of NORAD, can you take us behind the scenes at what it takes and how you come to the decision to shoot something down out of the sky?
Absolutely. I mean, there's based upon the NORAD agreement, which is a binational military command, the only binational military command in the world, you have an integrated command and control between Canada and the United States. Complex procedures layered on top of an effective and efficient command and control system that is trained and trained and trained and trained. So after detection, the regions of NORAD, the Canadian NORAD region, the Alaska NORAD region, the continental NORAD region, will launch fighters to be able to identify and determine what that contact is. Call it a target of interest. Once they do that intercept, then they will use a variety of characters or characterizations or factors that they will transmit via their radios, which are instantaneously transmitted back to NORAD headquarters. Using decision-making tools that categorize those factors, you're delineating between that which is threat versus that which is not. Which point in time, the authorities in NORAD, and I was one of them, would make recommendations to the governments of both nations as to what on the balance of probabilities these things are. So, for example, in the case of this, Minister Anand on Sunday was very clear that the object in the Yukon, they wanted a visual identification. That's why they waited for daylight. It was determined this is not a tactical threat. in any way, shape, or form, but that it was a hazard to flight, and therefore NORAD, on the balance of probabilities, would make the recommendation to shoot that down so that it did not risk life of Canadians.
And once they are able to find the remains of these objects and analyze them, how likely is it that we're going to get more information as to what exactly they were looking for and where they came from?
Yeah, so I think that those are two very crucial points that everybody is wanting to know. Country of origin and what are the specific capabilities that are out there. But it's like piecing together a puzzle with only having a few pieces. I think one of the bigger questions we want to ask is, what are they trying to get after? It's not just what are you looking at here, or what are you looking at there, or which sensors are on board, and which country does this come from? If it, let's just say, and there's an interesting case to be made with the first balloon coming from China. This is from China. What was their intent here? Was it to look at and gauge reactions from critical infrastructure and sensitive military targets? Or are they trying to gauge what the United States and Canada would do in a much larger crisis based upon the political and military reactions that have been done? And this is what everybody's trying to get to, is take those tactical pieces of origin and capability of sensors and deduce what the overarching intent is.
Right, and what may be next. Scott Clancy, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate having you on.
Thank you very much for having me.